Welcome everybody to another episode of the Min Ed Soda podcast. We are excited. We got another guest lined up. We are staying pretty close, Todd, to having one guest per week. We are meeting our expectations so far when we set out with this podcast of talking to leaders on a weekly basis.
Well, Kip, it really makes me wonder about the people that have been joining us. It really makes me question their ability to make good decisions, because if there are people like our guests today that are coming on our podcast, it makes me wonder how well they can judge character and product. So we don't get me wrong, we appreciate the heck out of people that have been coming on, and we've had awesome conversations like our one last week with Christy Sullivan about ELA standards, and I think this conversation is going to be super interesting as well. So I'm excited to get going.
Well, one thing that is always true, because we also put this on YouTube, is when the guest comes on with us, they get to be the best looking person on the channel. So that is always a plus when they're dealing with you and me, that they are definitely going to be the best person on the Zoom call.
Yeah. And I think personally, I think some people have taken advantage of that. If they think that they're not good looking, they just know that if they get an invite from me, they're like, yes, I want to be on. So I am the best looking person on the podcast. So I'm not quite sure how I should feel about that.
Well, I think right now you can roll right into introducing Troy, because he is the best looking dude on the podcast today.
Yeah, he is. Well, I'm really excited that I was able to nail down Troy Haugen from Lakes Country Service Cooperative today. And the reason that I wanted to have Troy on today is he's super smart about a lot of things, and he will say, "Oh no, I'm not," but if he says that, he's lying. But I wanted Troy to come on today so that we could have a talk about some of the legislative stuff that is going on at the Capitol, not just down in St. Paul, but also in Washington, D.C. And Troy always has a really good handle on the things that are going to affect us most in education. So welcome, Troy.
And timing could not be more perfect. At the time of recording this, we are less than 2 hours after Governor Walz just released some easing of some COVID restrictions. And so I'm sure we'll be able to go with lots of stuff today.
That's right.
Well, yeah, and the legislative session wraps up in what, a little over 2 weeks, Troy? Is that correct?
17th, which that would be interesting to see what happens.
Oh gosh, that's not even 2 weeks.
Yeah, right.
So Troy, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to be in the position that you're in Lakes Country? So
sure. Well, thanks.
Take it away.
Well, I guess if we're talking about policy and politics, and the best looking dude on the podcast, that gets a little scary, because if we're talking about politics, I guess we always talk about politics not telling the truth. So I guess we can all argue about who's telling the truth on that one. So as Todd said, I'm Troy Haugen. I work here at Lakes Country. I'm the director of career and college readiness, which has nothing to do with politics. So I've been here now for 8 years. I started my career as, believe it or not, I was a band director, just like Carrie Johnson that you talked to a couple of weeks ago. Carrie and I actually went to undergrad together. We're both Cobbers. She's a little younger than me, not much. We went to undergrad together. We were both band directors for a period of time, and then I went into administration, and I was an administrator for a number of years. And then I started doing this gig here at Lakes Country. And then I somehow got intertwined with some policy work around teacher licensure about 4 or 5 years ago. When I was working with my primary work here is I administer the federal Perkins grant for 26 of our school districts, and working with career and technical education programs. And the policy piece really started to intrigue me, because I saw some really big issues around teacher licensure in about 2016, 2017, and they really started to come to a head. And it really intrigued me, how this big machine, how this big system was working, and it wasn't working for people. So I got involved. I got appointed by then Commissioner Caselius to a legislative task force that ultimately made some recommendations to the legislature on to change the teacher licensure component for career and technical education. And a lot of those recommendations actually became part of the tiered licensure law right now, specific to specific to career and technical education teachers. Well, that kind of piqued my interest. You know, we had a little bit of a win, and then at the same time we got a legislative grant at Lakes Country around some career and technical education pieces. So I got a couple of early wins, which doesn't ever happen. So I kind of got interested in this, and so I've maintained my interest. I've maintained my my involvement in this policy work for the last several years, and it's expanded not to just state level, but I expanded to the federal level as well. I've been to Washington D.C. several times. I run a rural cohort of an education policy fellowship now. We're in our second year of the rural cohort of Minnesota's education policy fellowship program, which I love doing. I just love talking policy, and kind of one of those geeks. So yeah, it's just fun. I love it. I don't like the politics part of it so much, but I love the policy part of it.
I'm not
you're in that
wavering
room.
at you. I'm actually, it's kind of exciting. Today is the first day that I've been at the Lakes Country Service Co-op office since the middle of March of last year. So I'm able to be in the room that has lights that shut off. So if you're watching on YouTube, I'm not losing my mind or chasing flies around in here. I'm just trying to keep the lights on.
And if you
Not a tyranny of an or,
I'm
it
going
could
to
be
tell
both.
Max the people that are listening, what you're doing is you're flailing so that you can turn the lights back on, because they can't see that. And all of a sudden we start talking about it.
Yeah, sorry about that. Thanks, Kip. Troy, talk a little bit about some of the federal policies, the federal legislation that is going to be affecting schools in the upcoming school year.
Yeah, the biggest thing, the biggest fallacy, I think that most people don't understand is the federal government really doesn't impact. Prior to COVID, the federal government doesn't have a huge impact on education as much as the state government does. The education is really the responsibility of the state, not the federal government. So if you think about what really impacts education, it's primarily state policies, state and local policies. The big pieces that really primarily that come from the federal government that impact state are things like Elementary and Secondary Education Act, ESEA, which is now the most recent reauthorization is ESSA, elementary, ESSA, which is Title I, Title II, Title IV, Title V, all of those are the titles. The dollars that flow to districts based on needs for students that are economically disadvantaged. And then the Perkins funds, the federal Perkins dollars that I administer through for career and technical education programs. That's another chunk of dollars that come to districts. So that focuses and works in the federal education space. There's the Higher Education Act. There's a lot of dollars that flow from the federal government to higher education. There's WIOA, Workforce Innovation Opportunities Act, but that's an intersection between workforce and education. There's other pieces, obviously, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. That component is huge, special education law, but really those big overarching pieces are huge, but they are, again, those are kind of big blanket pieces, but they don't really impact state level policy as much as people think. Yep, testing is a result of Elementary and Secondary Education Act that came through No Child Left Behind, the reauthorization of No Child Left Behind. That's big, but all teacher licensure is a state piece. All All the graduation requirements are state requirements. All of that big pieces are all state requirements. They're not federal requirements. Those aren't, the federal government doesn't really have much of a say in what people do, what teachers do, what districts do, what superintendents do, what principals do. Most of that comes from the state. Now we're in a different time right now though, because of the virus, because of coronavirus. We've had 3 pretty significant stimulus packages that have come in the last year. The first one we all know is CARES Act. That happened a year ago in March. And that funding flowed from the federal government. That was a $2 trillion bill that was passed a year ago in March of 2020. That infused dollars into the education system, infused, I think, about $82 billion into the education system. That's a lot of money from the feds. And then there was a second flow of dollars too, and that one was called, I have to look this one up, that one was called the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act. We call it.
That's a mouthful.
Yeah, we kind of call it CARES too, but or some people call it CRSA. And that was a little bit smaller. That was only 82 billion. That was another 82 billion, but they kind of floated it a little different way. But now we've got the we've got this third one that districts are going to get some significant dollars now, called the American Rescue Plan. These ARP funds are a huge amount of dollars. It's $170 billion for education in this third stimulus package, that districts are going to, basically they've said, take the amount of money you got in CARES Act and multiply it by 5. That's what districts are getting, because it's based on, and it's being allocated to districts by Title I formula. It's not Title I dollars, but it's being allocated to districts based on Title I formula. That's a lot of money coming to districts, but it's intended to make sure that districts are, in a way, is somewhat held harmless and help students through this really tenuous time that is for the last 14 months of what's going to happen to our economy, what has happened to our economy, because the economy obviously impacts how districts are working and how districts are funded and how students engage and all of those things. So that's the biggest influx of federal dollars into a state system of education that's ever happened in the entire history of the United States. It's big.
So Kip, you got a question?
Yeah, I just was going to follow, the key word there was like to make districts whole, right? Like, because now we're also talking about like the bridge between federal government and state government. And there's been conversations like, oh, we want to see how much money is coming in this American Recovery Act. And so that before we make decisions on how much we're going to give on the formula, but we got to remember, like, this is like a savings account. We can't be.
You just muted yourself, Kip. You are good if you just like, oh, now you're back.
Yeah, I don't know where I lost. Just like, we can't be paying our mortgage with our savings account, and that's what this really is. This is making sure that our savings account was held harmless, right? Like the things that we had to pay extra for, revenues that we lost because of COVID, because we lost students that are now homeschooled. It's trying to make it so that we come through 2021 whole and are ready to start 21-22. And so I'm hoping, that like our state representatives aren't going, oh, we're going to get this big influx of cash, so now we don't need to give as much on the formula, because this is a one-time payment meant to make sure that, like you said, Troy, we're being held harmless.
Yeah, we have to be really careful, because as Kip said, it's a one-time investment that has a fiscal cliff to it. In that word fiscal cliff means that we're not getting it again. It's one time, and it has a expiration date. Those funds have to be spent basically by 2024. If those funds are not spent by 2024, they revert back to the federal government. So districts have to be very, very, so they don't have to be spent right now. So those dollars may flow to the district. So let's say the three of us work for a district. Let's make up this district that we're working for. And we are making the determination of what we're going to do with this dollars. Let's say we get $100 and we're going to spend this $100. We don't have to spend all $100 right now. We can spend those $100 up until basically 2024. It's called the Federal Tidings Amendment, if you really want to know. You have 27 months. The reality is it's going to be really important for districts to think about how they're going to use those dollars the most wisely they can, knowing that the impact of COVID, the economic impacts of COVID, are not just fiscal year 2021. They're probably not going to just be fiscal year 2022. There's been a number of people that say we are going to feel the impacts, the economic impacts of COVID for could be up to 10 years. So to keep your point, how do we make sure that districts are leveraging those dollars for as long as period of time and not obligating something as a result of those for something 10 years down the road, 15 years down the road, 20 years down the road, and holding our state legislature accountable to a point where we're not saying, well, we got all this money from the Fed, so then we don't have to do anything. So yeah, there's that really intricate balance there. We're in a really unique situation in the state legislature here in Minnesota too. We are the only state legislature in the entire United States that's a split legislature. The Minnesota House is controlled by the Democrats. The Minnesota Senate is controlled by the Republicans. That's the only legislative scenario like that in the entire United States. It's an interesting scenario. My gut is we're not going to have our constitutional mandate is to be, our legislative constitutional mandate is that we have to be done and have a budget by May 17th, or we don't have a operating state government come July 1, because we don't have a budget.
Yeah, one of the good things about having that split legislature, though, is that the policies and laws that do come out are bipartisan in nature. It helps prevent like major swings from the left to the right or right to the left or up and down, however you want to look at it. That it is true bipartisanship that allows anything to come through. And so that actually is probably an advantageous to us. And maybe it leads us into a little bit more of the conversation too of how, as school leaders and teachers, do we have an impact with our state legislature? Like, how do we help create movement around policy and our tiered licensure and all those things?
Yeah. To be honest with you, I think the very first thing that I would really recommend is understand what you're talking about. I know a lot of folks will say, call your legislature, call your legislature, call your legislator, call your legislator. And there's nothing wrong with that. But first understand what you're talking about and don't just go by what everybody else is telling you. If you're going to talk about tiered licensure, don't use somebody else's talking points. Understand the actual policy you're talking about. I think that's a really big mistake that a lot of people that advocate for specific pieces, specific policies, specific take a position on something, they oftentimes will take the position of whomever they want, whomever is trying to influence. And what happens is they lose out on the actual policy. They don't understand it. And that's oftentimes how we get bad policy. I know I'm a huge advocate for a lot of the provisions in tiered licensure. And I will also tell you that there's a lot of the House bill includes, and I'm going to be very honest right now. The House bill right now includes a lot of changes, a lot of the provisions in tiered licensure that are going to be very, very, very damaging to my career and technical education teachers. And yet the people that are oftentimes advocating for those changes don't have a clue about the impact, because they have groups saying this is bad, this is bad, this is bad. But when you ask them about what's bad about it, they can't explain it. And that's what that advocacy component without background understanding about what the actual impact is turns into bad policy. So honestly, number one, understand what you're talking about. And number two, then create relationships with your legislators. They are people. They are people that really do, I would argue on both sides of the aisle, they really do want to do what's best for Minnesota. And get to know them. They're your neighbors. Get to know them. They are generally very good people. That's my two biggest things.
Yeah. Say, Troy, I wanted to go back, and I apologize for going back on this, but when you were talking about the federal money that's being allocated to schools through the Title I formula, are there going to be strings attached to that money? Are there only certain ways in which you can spend that money? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah.
And then we're gonna come back to the state piece.
Sure. No. So the ARP funds that are coming, so there's all kinds of, in education, we know that we love acronyms. So the ARP funds that are coming, which is the third round of stimulus funds, they're coming through this ESSER again, which is that 90% or folks piece. And really this round of ESSER funds that are coming, there's very few stipulations. They can be used for pretty much anything. It is almost the wild west of how districts can use those funds. There are very, very few stipulations, and I can't even honestly tell you any specific ones right now off the top of my head. I don't think you could build buildings with them, but I think you could probably do minor renovation types of things, or like upgrading of HVAC and things like that, because it would be related to, don't quote me on that, but there are very few stipulations.
Yeah, I know some school leaders that I work with, they're asking about summer programming. Can we pay for transportation? Those, yep. And I said, absolutely. And I've told people, as far as I know, there are no stipulations like that. Like that's what that money is meant to be used for. Yep. So okay, I'm telling them the right thing.
Yep, the feds have actually not come out with specific guidance yet, which we're anticipating that'll happen. But it's like the federal government. We anticipate a lot of things that we sometimes take a little while to get.
Yeah. So let's get back to the state piece now. I'd asked you about the federal part. What are the things that's going to impact us the most? And it's probably the federal money that's coming schools' way. From a state standpoint, what are things that educators should be looking for, listening for in news and updates and things like that, that's going to impact the work that we do in schools?
Right now, it's all about the budget. It is Minnesota runs on a biennial legislative calendar and a biennial budget. And the odd number legislative sessions are the budget years. So the budget runs from odd year to even year. So July 1, 2021 to June 30th, 2022. Oh yeah, you'll figure it out. I can't use it anymore. So when July 1, 2021 hits, we do not have a state budget. The coffers of Minnesota's legislature, the state budget of Minnesota's coffers are gone. So the job of the legislature right now that's in session is to replenish those coffers and provide a budget for every one of the state departments and state agencies, and including school districts. So if the legislature does not come to consensus and have the House and the Senate and the governor sign a bill that replenishes those coffers by the end of the legislative session, which again, constitutionally, this year is May 17th, there is no budget. We have a state government shutdown on July 1. Now, the only way to prevent that, if that doesn't happen at the end of the legislative session, is if the governor brings people back calls the legislature back for a special session. The only person that can call the legislature back for a special session is the legislature. There is one tiny little provision in the Constitution that says it basically, in an event of a war, the legislature can call themselves back, but obviously that's not happening. So there's a lot of speculation about what's going on. I'll say, like, even today's press conference today is a political move, because the Republicans have basically said, you don't give up your emergency powers, you're not getting a budget. And guess what's happening if the governor needs to renew his emergency powers, he has to do that every 30 days, which means he has to bring back the legislature every 30 days. Well, guess after May 17th, when is the next time he needs to bring the legislature back? Is June 14th. Well, guess what? That gives them the opportunity to do another budget. So there's all these political moves that are going on. So for even him to signal today that starting on May 7th, we are now starting to loosen restrictions with the goal on July 1 to give up his emergency powers, there's a political move to that. There's these political strategies going on that may have to do with COVID, but it also has to do with this political strategy of getting a budget done. Really, bottom line, it's all about getting the budget done. And contrary to what everybody really understands, the largest part of Minnesota state budget is E12 education. 42% of Minnesota's budget is E12 education. The next largest thing is health and human services, and that's at 27 or 28%, I believe. Again, probably shouldn't quote me on that one, but E12 education is 42% of the state budget. If there's not an education omnibus bill, schools aren't going to get paid. It has to get done. So honestly, that is the focus. All of the policy language that's in the House, all of the policy language that's in the Senate is likely going to go by the wayside just to make sure there's a budget. Could there be some agreement on some policy pieces? Yep. But I don't really foresee that happening. The budget piece is the primary piece.
Oh man, you put a lot of stuff in my head today, Troy. So
is that a win or is that a loss?
Well, it's definitely a win. It's one of those things that, like, I'm just normally not thinking about. So I just find,
not only does it put it in our head, it makes our head hurt a little bit. Like, we're not used to that high level stuff.
Yeah. I find it super interesting. So I appreciate the conversation around it, but thank you. I mean, we could sit here and probably talk for about 3 or 4 more episodes just about things that are going on at the state. And like, I would really like to have you on sometime, maybe in June or sometime after the budget gets passed, and we could talk a little bit more about those things. So keep your schedule open, Troy. We'll be calling you back in to give us an update, and maybe you will be like, Kip, maybe we could make Troy he could be our first government correspondent with the Minnesota podcast.
Sure.
What do you think about that, Kip?
Would we have to put him on retainer and hold up, like he has like a cost? Because we still have only made about 70 cents through Anchor.
Okay, well, maybe
I don't want to have to register as a lobbyist.
Well, payment bazooka bubblegum. I like that idea. Well, hey, Troy, thanks. But you know what? We can't let you go without some rapid fire questions. That's what everybody gets, and you know it's coming. So
I suppose.
If you're ready, I'm going to start firing a few at you. Okay.
Go for it.
Hopefully your family's not listening to this. We won't try to get too personal with them, but our first question for you is, what is your biggest addiction?
Ooh, probably biggest addiction. I hate to say it, but work.
Oh,
Now it's been work.
gross.
Yeah, I know, but it's this kind of stuff though. It's this intricacies of the policy and politics, and it's kind of an addiction. I hate to say it, but it is.
It is super interesting.
As long as I don't have to mess with it, as long as I can do it from the periphery. Yeah.
Yeah. Next question for you is, how many books have you read so far this year?
Ooh, I should have counted. Probably 15 or 20 at least.
Wow, that's impressive. Troy, when you dance, you look like...
I don't. Period.
You're not like Patrick Swayze,
Oh, God,
Dirty
no.
Dancing,
Nope,
nothing like that?
I don't. I just period don't. You can ask anybody that knows me. I just don't. You would know why if I tried.
What is the worst job you can... Oh, go ahead, Kip.
I think in the future you have to change that to question: Are you Patrick Swayze or are you Chris Farley? Because you got the direct visual from Saturday Night Live.
Awesome. Thanks for putting that visual in my head, Kip. I really appreciate it. The old Chippendales.
Chris Farley, because he's long gone.
Oh man. For those of you that don't know the reference, that's like the SNL skit of the Chippendales dancers. So you look it up on YouTube sometime. Your next question, Troy, is what is the worst job you could have?
Oh, worst job I could have. Oh boy. Worst job I could have. Retail. Ugh.
Yeah.
Even if that means discount.
I could see where that be.
Yeah, no.
I think that'd be rough
online
too.
shopping.
Yeah. Okay, and because we're running a little short of time here, Troy, you're only going to get one more. So we're kind of letting you off the hook, but we know that you're going to be back after the legislative session is over. And the last question, hopefully this is an easy one for you. What is your favorite TV channel?
It's channel? Yeah, I don't know if I have a channel anymore. We do streaming services now, and I'm kind of a Hulu guy now.
Okay. So what kind of stuff do you watch on Hulu?
I'm kind of one of these medical drama kind of guys. I hate to admit it. I'm the Grey's Anatomy, any of these medical drama kind of, New Amsterdam, The Resident. I like all of those. Ugh.
Got it.
And the beauty of Hulu the beauty of Hulu is you can go back and watch like St. Elsewhere, ER. Like they're all they're showing up down on the bottom of my Hulu right now.
I know. I started watching ER again.
That was a good show.
It was.
For those of you that haven't seen ER, the TV show, you got to check that out. And for those of you that are ladies that are listening out there, George Clooney will probably, I don't know, I'm just taking advice from my wife, but she seemed to like George Clooney a lot. So, all right. Well, Troy, thank you so much for joining us today. And again, we're going to be reaching out to you after the legislative session is over, and we're going to pick your brain a little bit more, and we'll get caught up on all that stuff that is going to be affecting us in education around policy decisions. So thank you. We really appreciate it. Kip, what did you learn today?
Well, I learned that my brain hurts when Troy makes me think this hard and go so deep, but also, just keep reinforcing how muddy and complicated school law, policy, statutes is, that there's so many layers and there's so many things that impact different pieces that, it's not as always as easy as just calling your legislator, or calling, the representatives that are on a committee, that we really are like moving mountains sometimes when we're trying to make shifts in policy and state statute and federal regulations.
Yeah, I would agree. And that I would tag on to that, Kip, what Troy said about just understanding what you're talking about. If you are going to call one of your legislators or, write to them, understand what it is that you're talking about. And don't be afraid to reach out to them because like Troy said, they're real people. They're your neighbors. Reach out to them, form a relationship with them. And, it helps if you can have a civil conversation with someone instead of doing a lot of shouting back and forth, because then nothing gets done. So awesome. Kip, you want to take us home here?
Oh, absolutely. There it is. Episode 8 of the Min Ed Soda podcast. Hashtag Min Ed Soda. Hopefully we start getting some more dialogue. You can get a hold of us on Twitter at Kip Link and at Principal Learner. And that'll be we'll make sure we get that in the titles for the podcast so people can quickly find it. And we'll be back with another episode next week, hopefully.
Hey, and I just got a quick shout out to Kip. Kip is actually recording this from his car. So I appreciate you, Kip, taking the time out of your schedule he just had a meeting with a school leader and now he's recording a podcast from his comfortable car. So thanks for doing that, Kip. And thanks, Troy. Appreciate it. Yeah, it's awesome. So, all right. Take care, everybody. We'll see you next time.